everyone. I'm Brian Lampkin, one of the owners of Scuppernong Books, and you have Larry Miller Time, a discussion of his book, The Story of the Lost Legend Who Sparked the Tar Heel Dynasty. Tonight we have Larry here, along with our host, Eddie Huffman, and we have a special guest, co-author Stephen Demorest, with us tonight. I just want to jump in and say a few things real quick. I want to thank Catherine Walton for all her work on getting this Larry Miller Time book out into the world and for her initiation of this event tonight. For those of you who don't know, Scuppernong Books is an independent bookstore in the heart of downtown Greensboro. And typically this would be an in-person event. It would be smashing with lots of people, and we'd have wine and hijinks and signed books. But we can't do that right now. But we must carry on. So we're going to do a Zoom event, but I encourage you, nevertheless, to buy Larry's book through Scuppernong Books website, scuppernongbooks.com, and then we will have signed book plates from Larry to put into your book, so you'll get a signed edition of the book. And go ahead and do that at your leisure. We do have upcoming Zoom events, and I guess the one I'm going to mention right now is on Friday, October 23rd, as we bring back the hardest working man in Zoomdom, Eddie Huffman, as he'll host a conversation with music critic David Menconi and his new book, Step It Up and Go, the story of North Carolina popular music from Blind Boy Fuller and Doc Watson to Nina Simone and Superchunk. So that's Friday, October 23rd at 7 p.m. David Menconi with host Eddie Huffman. All right, speaking of that hardest working man in Zoomdom, Eddie Huffman is a music critic and the author of John Prine in Spite of Himself, but he's also a Tar Heelophile as well, and an amateur historian of UNC basketball lore. He is the perfect host for tonight's Larry Miller Time event. So without further ado, Eddie Huffman, please take it away.
Thank you, Brian. I don't know if I deserve all that, but I appreciate
you
the kind
do.
words. Yeah, well, thanks to you and Steve and Scuppernong for doing this. You've been a great asset to Greensboro, and just a big help to me. I really appreciate all the events I've been able to do at Scuppernong for my work. Well, it's an honor to be on here with Larry and Stephen Demorest, the author of the new book about Larry. I guess one thing I want to talk about to begin with is just that anybody who grew up in North Carolina in the last 50 or 60 years knows that college basketball is sort of a religion around here. It's a huge thing, and I really grew up with it as my folklore. My father was a huge fan. He would tell stories about Everett Case bringing college basketball from Indiana. Case wanted to see, a backboard, a basket on every barn like he saw in Indiana, and pretty much brought that to pass at NC State. Beginning at NC State, that sort of started the modern tradition of ACC and college basketball in North Carolina. Heard stories about the legendary 1957 championship when Carolina went into triple overtime for each of the last two games, and beat Wilt Chamberlain in Kansas for the championship in '57. Of course, heard stories about the Dean Smith's very rough early days, and then leading into Larry's era when Carolina went to the Final Four 3 years in a row, including a national championship game against Lou Alcindor, who changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar later in UCLA. Let's see. And I was born in '64, the year Larry started at Carolina, so I missed his era, but I was around for Phil Ford, Walter Davis, Mitch Kupchak, Mike O'Koren, Rich Joniker, Al Wood, those guys. And I remember going to a football game, and I'd see O'Koren or I'd see Al Wood walking across campus. And it was like seeing a movie star or a rock star for me. It was just, and I'm sure Larry got, from the book, it's obvious Larry got a lot of that kind of attention on campus and around Chapel Hill as well in his day. Let's see. I was a kid. I'm sure my friend Angie, who's on here, can relate to this. I cried when Carolina lost to Marquette in 1977 for the national championship. Went to Franklin Street with my brother, who was on the baseball team at Carolina in the late '70s and early '80s. Went down to Franklin Street in '82 when Dean Smith finally won his first national championship with Michael Jordan's game-winning shot as a freshman. but hoping to hear more from Larry about his era and just kind of the beginning of that sort of dynasty with Carolina. There's a quote here that's on the back of the book from Charles Scott, who was the first black player to play varsity sports at Carolina. He said, Larry Miller is the tradition that Carolina talks about. Everything starts with him. And I mentioned those final 4 years in 67, 68, and 69. Larry was on those teams for 2 of those years, including that game against UCLA for the championship in 68, which unfortunately nobody could beat UCLA in that era. They won 7 in a row and 10 out of 12. So it didn't work out so well for Carolina, but really set the tone for great seasons and really kind of legendary coach. Let's see, Larry was the men's basketball player of the year in 1966 and 67 for the ACC, which I believe is unmatched since then. I don't think anyone else has ever been ACC player of the year for more than 1 year. Let's see, he was first team All-American in 1968, played for several teams in the ABA when it was the upstart league before it joined with the NBA later in the, I guess later in the 70s. Larry has had an interesting career. He was sort of toyed with acting for a little bit. He's worked in real estate, lived all over the country, done a lot of interesting things, which I want to talk to him about. So I guess we will maybe start with Larry, if you don't mind, with your the place where you started out and ended back up in. Is that Catasauqua? Am I pronouncing that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, tell me about Catasauqua and the basketball tradition you came out of there.
Oh, it's small town, 5,000 people. We always competed with. We were the smallest school in the league, and we competed with all the. We were Class C, and our league was Class A, so we had to step up and play. But we had a real proud tradition. Matter of fact, in the 50s, we had teams play in the Madison Square Garden from our high school. So
wow.
We had some real good tradition before, and that carried through my years. We won 4 straight league titles, and we never got to the final game, but we got far into the playoffs. We had a 1,000 seat stadium where people would stand in line for hours just to get tickets to go in there to see us play, and all kinds of weather. They'd be standing in line to get to the games, and a very proud tradition carried on after I left, and it's a wonderful little place to live.
Nice. And I believe your father's the one who really got you started playing basketball?
Yeah, after he caught me smoking as a kid, I was 8 years old or 10 years old at the time, and he he thought he was smoking too much, so he started chewing candy to lessen his habit, and he got bad teeth after that. But turns out I was the one smoking the cigarettes, giving them to my buddies. He caught me doing that, whooped my butt a little bit, and told me, "Yeah, I got to change my ways." And I used his work habits and ethics to launch my stay in basketball.
Yeah, it sounds like you spent a lot of time in the gym by yourself, just working on your shots. Talk a little bit about just kind of that work ethic, what you did to
Well, we
lead
did
up to
weight.
your career. Yeah.
Well, he built me some weights and isometrics. We toyed with all kinds of stuff. I jumped with weighted vests on. In the winter, we shoveled off the snow from the courts. Broke into gyms to play any kind of weather. 2, 3, 4 hours a day was no big deal. It was round the clock stuff.
Yeah.
And besides, I had summer jobs besides that, so I was pretty busy.
It sounds like it. Well, and one thing that Stephen talks about in the book is that basketball players were not really encouraged to bulk up in that era. I guess it was seen as maybe slowing you down, making you not as nimble. So you were kind of an exception, I believe, as a more muscular player.
Well, yeah, but I didn't really emphasize the arm muscle deals. It was mostly the legs, lower body, legs, and shoulders and stuff like that. But I didn't do a lot of bicep work. Just mainly stuff to make me get under the boards and leap higher.
Yeah. Okay. Well, talk, Larry, if you will, about the recruiting days. It sounds like you had people from all over the country pestering you for years, trying to get you to come to their schools.
Yeah, we got a lot of attention. It started my freshman year, basically, right at the end of it. But the stories were almost ridiculous, some of them. It got to the point where I was on the phone a lot with them. My high school coach wouldn't let anybody talk to me unless they made an appointment. It couldn't be during school hours. He would defer all the calls to him. My parents, I made a deal with my mother that I take them out to dinner with one recruit a week, because they would answer all the calls. My father worked at Mack Truck, so he was going during the day. My mother would take all the calls, and she would, at the beginning, she would talk to anybody that called. She was polite to everybody, and then gave the message to me. And then later on, we had to narrow it down to, let's say, the first 50 schools, and then 35, then 25, then 10. But she always was the one to eliminate them. But I mean, people would drive up without. Frank McGuire came up there one day with his buddies. And this is right after he left the 76ers and was going to, he didn't know where he was going to go, but he recruited me. He came up there with his assistants. He was recruiting me without a school.
Yeah.
And then another time, the guy from Wichita State called me up and says, "We got to have a decision right now." And I said, "Well, Coach, I'm only a junior." And there was all kinds of stories like that, bizarre. But my mother, God bless her, she took care of the calls. And then at the end, when it was time to make a decision, the day I made the decision to go to Carolina, I absolutely had no idea where I was going to go between Duke and Carolina that day. And I stopped. I said, "Mom, Dad, what do you think? What do you think? Where do you want me to go?" And they said, "Larry, it's your decision." And I said, "Well, what do you like about either one?" "Well, we like them both." They would absolutely not tell me where they preferred me to go. And so it was my choice. And I think I made the right decision. And I think they did at the end too. They fell in love with Carolina. They got down there once a year to see, but they always felt, they felt the same way I did about the place.
Yeah, yeah. It sounded like Vic Bubas, the coach at Duke, was really working on you for a long time. It sounds like you felt good about him, and it was a tough choice. Yeah.
I did, and he sent me a letter after. I couldn't even tell him I couldn't go there. I was almost in tears. And he wrote me a very, very wonderful letter, which I didn't open until after I played my final game against them in the ACC tournament, because I was so close to him that it would have affected me. And then I almost went down to see him. I called Bobby Reedy up when I was coming back for that Carolina reunion, I believe it was. We were going to go visit him, but we never connected up. But I wanted to see Coach Bubas. Unfortunately, he passed away right after that.
Ah, that's too bad. Well, it sounded like there were a couple. My impression from the book is there were a couple of main factors that decided on it, helped you decide on Carolina. It sounded like you were worried about maybe not being having enough playing time at Duke. Was that part of the issue?
No, I don't think so. It wasn't that. It was they had a lot of talented players. I just didn't feel comfortable with the guys that were there at the time. They were all good guys and everything like that. But I mean, as far as the playing style was, but let's face it, when I went to Carolina, if I could have played as a freshman, it would have been a lot different, because then it would have been Billy, myself, and Bobby Lewis. And I think the three of us could have really been, we could have gone for the national title with that kind of group.
Yeah, Billy being Billy Cunningham, of course.
Yeah, because we were all kind of smaller players, but we all ran well and rebounded well.
Yeah.
But then let's say after that, if we hadn't gotten, it was a continuum of things that made us better, because had we not gotten the class with Rusty and Dickie and Bill, Joe, and that group,
mm-hmm.
And then if we hadn't gotten Charlie, it still wouldn't have. All those things had to happen for Carolina to take off.
Yeah.
And fortunately, it did happen, and then it kept on going from there.
Well, and Coach Smith was sort of on the rocks, it sounded like, when in the early days. I think you were there for the infamous hanging of Dean Smith in effigy when you came back
Yes, we
from a
came
road
back
game.
to Woolen Gym one night. We were at Greensboro. I think we'd lost the game. They lost the game. And the dummy was hanging out from that as we pulled up on the bus. And then Billy went up there and ripped it down.
Yeah.
But yeah, it like I say, if we hadn't gotten those guys afterward, who knows? Because
Yeah.
you can't win with one or two guys. You have to have a good group together.
Sure, sure. Well, tell us about playing for Coach Smith. What was he like in those days?
Oh, he was tough. He was a tough taskmaster. I mean, he didn't care, who you were. If you didn't follow the rules, you were in trouble. But he was a disciplinarian, and he believed in, we did 7-minute drills, and we were done with that. We moved on to the next station, whether it was right or not. But he was a 2-hour practice man. We got all we could in 2 hours, and then he let us go because he was also wanted us to go to school and make sure we graduated. So he was a disciplinarian, but also he was an educator too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I believe he had spies everywhere. It sounded like you felt like you were closely watched. So
yeah, he kept an eye on us.
Yeah, yeah. And I know Stephen writes in the book about that he expected you to go to church every Sunday and bring in a program to prove that you'd been to church.
In the beginning, I got Billy Cunningham to get me a program, and then finally, I turned it in then, and finally, I just said, Coach, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
And I said, I can't be a hypocrite. I said, if I don't believe in something, I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to lie to you that I did it. And he said, well, what would you do if you were at home? Would your parents, wouldn't they make you go to church? And I said, absolutely not. And I don't want to do that again here either. So he said, he excused me.
Okay. Well, one thing I wanted to ask about one of Coach Smith's famous offenses before the shot clock was the four corners, of course. And I was surprised. I remember there was a sort of notorious game in 1978, I think, where Carolina started with the four corners against Duke, and the score was 7-0 Duke at halftime. So it's a football score. But it sounded like he was doing that sort of thing in your era as well.
Well, yeah, actually, we were up on them in that 1960 64-5, I think it was.
Uh-huh.
We were up in them 19-12, and they went to the Final Four that year, but they beat us 21-20.
Yeah,
that was
football score. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the game. But it wasn't designed to do that. It was designed. We played Ohio State at Ohio State. Bobby Lewis and I played the four corners the whole game, and we beat them 82-72 in Columbus. And that was the four corners, same one we ran against Duke. Duke would not come out and play us.
Ah, okay.
Because the deal was Bobby and I could have beat anybody one-on-one because we were quicker, but they didn't come out to play us. They just, chose not to come out. That's why the game was so low.
So there was just a lot of standing around, it sounds like.
The four corners was designed to score. It was an offensive thing. It wasn't a defensive, slow it down type deal.
Mm-hmm.
So he meant for us to score. Phil Ford played it well in 76. That was a four corners, an offshoot of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure anybody ever ran it better than Phil Ford did.
He was the master, yes.
Yeah.
No question.
Well, tell me about some of your teammates. It sounded like you and Bobby Lewis had a really good chemistry together.
Very good, yeah. Actually, I went down there. I saw him play in high school at a tournament in Allentown when he came up from St. John's, and then he chose Carolina. And actually, I think he was one of the main reasons I went to Carolina, because I saw him play, how intense he was and things like that. So, but he was a great teammate. He could score any amount of ways you wish to. That's why I say he and Billy and I would have made a really nice team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it sounded like you encouraged Coach Smith to bring in Charlie Scott.
Oh, absolutely. We recruited him, and he was actually committed to Davidson, I believe, at the time. And we took him out to dinner, and he wasn't very talkative at the time, but you could tell he was a great person, and we knew he was a great basketball player. And I told him if he came there, he wouldn't have to worry about anything socially, as far as when we were, with him, that we'd take care of him, and also that we'd have a chance to go for the national title.
Yeah, yeah, and of course that came to pass.
Yeah.
So tell me about those runs. Obviously, it was a different era. The ACC tournament was huge then, and I'm guessing maybe the NCAA tournament wasn't quite what it became later. Talk about what it meant to you, playing in the ACC tournament, playing.
Well, actually, that was like the national title. I mean, back then it really was, because I know it wasn't the final game or anything like that, but the ACC tournament back then was immensely popular. But also, it was a very intense, it was pressure cooked atmosphere you could ever get. Those were 3 days of pure gut wrenching, all day long before a game. And you played 3 straight games all at night. And all that day, during the day, you were getting eat up by just, getting yourself ready to play.
Mm-hmm.
But you had to win 3 straight games to just make the tournament.
Yeah.
And by that senior year, we had already played 6 games before we met UCLA, which would have been a national title already. But we had to play an extra game, and unfortunately, we lost.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that game, if you will. I know from the book, it sounds like you were fairly confident that you guys could really take on UCLA. You thought you had a chance at beating them.
Yes, I really did. Unfortunately, we slowed it down a little bit, and we didn't play our running game, because we averaged like 80 some points a game that whole year against everybody, and that game we only had 50 something. So we just didn't run our game.
Never quite got in your groove for that.
Right.
Yeah. And I know Charlie Scott ended up playing in the Olympics that year in Mexico City, and it sounded like you were considered trying out for the Olympics, but decided against it.
I already played the year before as a junior in the World University Games in Tokyo, and we won the gold medal there. And Charlie was going to go down to this one, and I didn't want to. This was the beginning of pro season for me, and so I didn't want to, take that time out, because I knew what you had to put into that, that month or whatever it is. And I just, and we played a barnstorming tour after the season, which was another 30 games. So I just want to take a little time off.
Of course. And it sounded like you enjoyed your summer. It sounded like you had a lot of fun in those days.
Yeah, I did. Yes, I did. I liked my time off.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it was a surprise. You went from being this acclaimed player, All-American in your senior year, to not getting drafted in the first round by the NBA. What was that a shock to you at the time?
Yes, it was. But I don't know what the NBA was doing, because they had like a 10-person draft or something like that. And I wasn't in that. And the LA the Stars drafted me, and Dean represented me in contract negotiations. And I got a good deal, so I didn't even hesitate about signing with them.
Yeah. And ABA was just a year or so old at that point, I believe.
Yeah, it was just coming about.
Yeah.
It was just coming about.
And from the book, it sounds like they were kind of making it up as they went along. It sounded like you had a lot of ups and downs.
It was a rough shot. Yeah, there's no question about it. There was not very much established money nor coaching, and everything was, kind of disorganized in a lot of places. So there was a lot of funny situations.
Yeah. Well, Larry, let's take a break for a minute. Let Stephen come in and talk a little bit. Stephen is the author of the book, and he is an award-winning television writer. He has won, I believe, 6 Emmy Awards, Writers Guild of America Award. He wrote for pretty much every soap opera you've ever heard of, Guiding Light, As the World Turns, General Hospital, All My Children. Before that, he wrote some mystery novels and worked as a music journalist for Circus Magazine, which I want to hear about the Led Zeppelin plane ride sometime before this is all over. But Stephen, tell us a little bit about a little more about your background, if you will, and how you met Larry.
Boy, well, the path to Larry was through the soap opera, because when I started writing that Guiding Light, about 6 months after I began, a Statesville, North Carolina girl joined the team, and that she became my wife, Nancy, and she was a big basketball fan, as you could guess. And in those days, I was a New England Yankee. I was, I cut my teeth on Chris Mullin's St. John's teams, and she pitied me for that and explained to me that North Carolina was really what it was all about. And I'd seen Carolina play in March and so on, and seen them beat Georgetown and things like that. But she'd always talked, and she could always, she memorized the 1968 roster, which impressed me. And she always told me that, Larry Miller was like, Dean Smith is wonderful and Woody Durham is beloved, but Larry Miller was the deal. And so we, after we got married, lived in Connecticut for 6 years, she convinced me to move to the South. I came down here, and it's funny listening to you about your first teams. I think a lot of people who are arrivals date their arrival with which team was going on. So I arrived during Antoine Jameson and Vince Carter's team in '96.
That's a good time to arrive.
Time to show up.
Yeah.
I very quickly saw the light, and there was a time when a few years ago, when Nancy and I were driving up to Rhode Island, where my New England family has a house, and I'd always been going up 95. I was sick of going through Washington and Baltimore. Somebody said, "Why don't you try the Shenandoah? Go up 81 to Harrisburg and across." We had a dog. We had to find a place to stay overnight. I found a residence inn in Allentown, and where Nancy looks up at this road sign that says Catasauqua Road. Ding, because that's what else you think of when you see Catasauqua, except this is where Larry Miller's from. So we go on Rhode Island. She starts researching on the web, finds out how to track him down, and on the return trip, she says, "I just want to go to Starbucks and get some coffee and go knock on his door and say hello." Because it turns out she had met him when she was a 10-year-old at some all-star game in Newton Conover, I think, as well as watching him on TV, of course, which, there weren't that many games back in the 60s, but on TV. So she knocks on the door, no answer, opens the door, sticks her head in, no answer. And I'm saying, "Okay, come on, let's go." And she said, "No, no, no." And she walks down the driveway, disappears into his backyard. I'm sitting here waiting to be, busted for intruding on this character.
She's climbing up the drain pipe.
Not almost, but she was looking down at the door to go into the basement that was open until she spots Larry, in a lawn chair with his back to her out in the garden. And she waves at me and tells me to go away for half an hour or whatever. And they have a really nice, they hit it off. And she comes out in about half an hour with him, and Larry's, amiable, and we talked about the dogs and his roses and all that stuff, because I'm not at that point an expert in him. But as she and I are driving home the rest of the way to North Carolina, she tells me that he had always had this idea of doing a book called Those Crazy Carolina Kids, which would be a compilation of all the funny letters you get from these 8 and 10 and 12-year-olds, which, to me reminds me of an Art Linkletter show called Kids Say the Darndest Things or something like that. And but they also got, and she had written letters to him, fan letters, of course, when she was a kid. So we get home, and about a week later, she gets an envelope from him, which has a headshot from his Universal acting career when he was taking acting lessons, and a copy of the letter she wrote him 50 years ago when she was a 10-year-old that had been saved in a trunk that his mother kept, where he had always just sent all this stuff home to his mom, who kept it, and he just hung on to all that old stuff. And without really looking at it, after her visit, he dug through there and found this letter. So that was kind of like kismet, that this bond was still in place after 50 years. And she called him up and said, I think I know somebody who can, write your stories if you want to tell your stories. And Larry had done the occasional interview before, but he hadn't really had an interest in doing a book about himself. So I kind of called her the Larry Whisperer, because she kind of convinced him that people would want to hear these stories. I don't know if he understood what kind of an outpouring there would be from the Carolina alumni fan base, nor did I, but I kind of took her word for it. And it's been very gratifying to see how many people are glad that we did work on those stories and bring them out.
Yeah, it sounds like you're having trouble keeping the book in print at the moment. It's so popular.
Well, the whole printing business, everybody seems to be reading books these days since you can't go out that much. So it is hard to keep things in stock. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's see. And I believe this is your first sports book.
It is.
It doesn't read like your first sports book. It's just incredibly well researched. It's funny. It's a great read. Tell me a little bit about what was the challenge for you going into sports?
Well,
for this
yeah,
one?
thank you. I didn't quite know how a sports book should be written, but I'd always enjoyed reading the sports pages. And to me, there's a similarity between sports writing and mystery writing in that it's not reverent. The writers are often having fun. They're not shy about being a little purple here and there. And as I researched, Larry's from an era where there's not a lot on videotape. I never saw him play in person. And when you see him now, it's black and white and almost slow motion. It's just, but I could read the sports writers in the Catasauqua paper and at the Daily Tar Heel, and it seems like all Daily Tar Heel writers end up with jobs at Sports Illustrated. So,
yeah, Curry Kirkpatrick was one of my writing heroes as a kid. He was a Carolina grad who ended up at Sports Illustrated.
Yeah, and part of the fun of this whole project is not only the players and teammates of Larry's that I've gotten to meet, either in person or over the phone, but also the sports writers like, Larry Keith, and talked to Ron Green Jr. about his dad, Ronald Green, and stuff like that. So, so I kind of took a cue from that to be a little bit unrestrained, and once I had the research down, to have fun and try to, Larry wanted it to be a fun book. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to. I mean, I spoke to. There were people who could encourage me to do academic, data analysis of fan bases and have 20 pages of footnotes, and I just had no interest in that. And I was kind of retired from the soap opera business, so I figured I'm going to do this the way I want to do it, and basically give a You Are There guided tour of Larry's life riding shotgun with Larry, and trying to make it as present tense as possible through his narration, and so that hopefully all the readers of this book can feel like they're the fly on the wall watching this stuff happen.
When you were able to talk to a lot of Larry's early, his mentor from Catasauqua and some of his teammates, tell me a little bit about tracking down some of those people and what kind of stories you heard.
It was great, because it's, some of these, very early on, my wife had the idea that we should bookend the book with beginning in Catasauqua, ending in Catasauqua. So I was able to talk to guys who, played knee-high baseball with him when they were 10 years old, and now they're buddies of his when they're all retired in their 70s. And like Bobby Nemeth, who was a minor league ball player for a while, and became Larry's, once his dad realized, this kid's a little too active for me to keep up with, Bobby Nemeth was a 24-year-old guy who was playing in the Industrial League and for the Allentown Jets and so on. And I spoke to him. Well, he's now a legendary coach up there with the Northampton court named after him. So then I got to talk to Bob Reedy, who he scrimmaged with a lot, who ended up going to Duke a year ahead of Larry, and they played against each other in college and then scrimmaged against each other in the summers. So it was I really enjoyed meeting the community up there. I mean, there's a one of his oldest buddies who used to skip out on, sneak out of communion with the Catholic school is now, Sam McCarty, who runs McCarty's, which is kind of the clubhouse where all these guys were gathering at the time. Nancy went up there and started, interviewing these guys and tracking them down and then looping me into the project too. So I wanted to tell Larry's point of view story. I wanted to have it be thorough. I wanted it to be fun for the reader. And I wanted the guys in Catasauqua and who were on his teammates at UNC to say, basically, I got it right. And beyond that, I hope other people enjoy it too. But those were the guys who I was trying to serve correctly.
Nice. All right. Well, let's see, Larry, you want to jump back into kind of where we left off? We were talking about the ABA, your days with the ABA. Tell us a little bit more about just kind of some of the coaches you worked with, some of the people you played with. I know Julius Irving was almost a teammate, but Wilt Chamberlain was sort of a coach who phoned it in. It sounded like. Let us hear a little bit more about those days, if you will.
Larry's muted still, I think.
Larry, we can't hear you, Larry.
There we go.
Okay. You got it?
We got you.
Okay, my first game as a pro was with the LA Stars, and we have a grand opening at the LA convention where the Lakers used to play until they built a new arena. First game, we're going down to the final minutes of the game. It's a tight game. I'm having a good game. In the 20s, lots of rebounds, assists. And with about 2 minutes to go, the coach takes me out of the game. I'm figuring he's taking me out because he wants to tell me something or set up a last play. No, he sits me down. And that was my time. It's like I was at a dance and they take me out of the final dance. I was shocked because I always wanted to be there at the end. I wanted the ball at the end and I wanted that moment, but he took me out and never explained it to me. So that was my awakening to the pros.
Yeah.
And I saw a lot of that stuff during my career. Sometimes I would play about 3 minutes and sometimes I would play the whole game. Didn't make any sense.
Well, I know Stephen talks in the book about you being a tweener. You were kind of the size. It was sort of tough. They weren't quite sure where to place you, what
Right.
position to have you. Yeah.
That was a problem, but I didn't mind playing. I could hold my own at any position. If I didn't score, I would rebound or, just pass the ball off or steal the ball or something like that. I was always in the mix. So I could have played with just about anybody. But some people, like you said, they didn't see me as as a position, like Julius was, the ultimate forward type individual.
No question where he was going. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. We ended up playing with Bones McKinney. He was quite a character. It sounded like you and he did not get along that well.
Well, not because of me. He just didn't like me. I think he didn't like the fact that I was from Carolina or something. It was something stupid, but I tried to do everything he asked of me. I worked harder. He even told me one time at the end of a preseason camp, which I completely dominated because I worked so hard. I was the doctor told me when I went for my physical right before the season started, he said, if I didn't know you told me that you were working out so hard, I'd take you to the hospital right now because your heart's hardly beating. It was on like a 40 beats. It was almost like it was a level. And I was so quicker than anybody, but right before the start of the first game of the season, he said, Larry, I've never seen anybody work this hard in their lives, and nobody deserves more to start than you do, but I can't. And that was it. That was his explanation.
Did he explain why he couldn't?
No.
Yeah. No.
And slowly as the season went on, I didn't hardly play at all. Then he got fired. Then I played.
Yeah.
That's this season I set the record. So
once you were kind of set loose to do your thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, that's I think I neglected to mention that earlier. You hold the single game scoring record for the ABA. Was it 67 points, I believe?
Yes.
The game in 1972. Now, was that with the Cougars, or who were you with
Yes,
at that point?
it was with the Cougars.
Okay, all right. And the Cougars would play, I believe, was it Charlotte, Greensboro, and Raleigh? You rotate around.
Yes, all three places, right. And sometimes we even play like smaller towns too in the beginning, so everybody in the state could get to see us. It was like a barnstorming tour all over again.
Yeah. And did Billy Cunningham end up playing with the Cougars? I was thinking you guys ended up together a little bit at least.
Right. Well, we almost played together, but I was with the Cougars when they wanted to sign Billy, and he was going to get about $300,000 a season, and I had played for $45,000 the prior season, and I set the record, averaged about 18 points a game, and led the team all around in all the other stats. And they tried to sign me for the same amount of money, and which was ridiculous because, you only play about, if you're lucky, you play 10 years. And so you got to get a raise. And I just wanted 60,000, which is 15,000 more than I made. And they called and told me that if I didn't sign, that I was going to get put on the expansion roster. And San Diego, when they had K.C. Jones, was the coach then. Well, they picked me right away. And then Carolina tried to get me back. They had no problem giving me the 60,000 out in San Diego. And Carolina they didn't want to budge. And then I understand that the couple hundred season ticket holders, canceled because of that. But and then they tried to get me back, but obviously San Diego wasn't going to have that.
Yeah. Well, let me jump backwards just a little bit. I meant to ask you about this earlier. We talked a little bit about your acting lessons. Tell us a little bit about that time in LA, and I believe you were living on the beach and had some sort of deal with Universal Studios. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, actually, I studied the acting coach at Universal Studios had seen me on TV and knew I was living out there. So he called me up and asked me if I was interested. And I certainly was. And I went through classes like every day after practice for a year or so. And I went through my acting skit for them, and they accepted me as as an actor. At that time, though, you had to, if you signed a contract with them, you had to sign like a 7-year deal. Now it's totally different. You can do anything, one-time deal or whatever it is. But then they wanted me to quit basketball. And I said I wasn't interested in quitting because that was only my second year. But I did get an offer for a contract for a 7-year deal, which they did contact me after I quit basketball. And I had the opportunity to go back again, but I just wasn't interested at that point.
So you never made it onto an episode of Mannix or anything like that.
No.
We can't find you on the reruns.
Just on the Dating Game or something like that.
Oh, that's right. You were on a Dating Game episode. Yeah.
Yeah, I was on Truth or Consequences, and
yeah.
I actually did a film 3 years ago. So I did act on the big screen, but Stephen will tell you, I don't know what happened to the film. But it was produced, but it was just on. It went to Cannes and all the film festivals, and it got accepted, but I don't know what happened to it.
It's at the Venice Film Festival, and it's won a bunch of prizes at the
Yeah.
Toronto and things like that. But it's a art film, basically,
What's the name of the film, Stephen?
called Giants Being Lonely, produced by Almost Schnabel and directed by Greer Patterson, who's a North Carolina guy, artist.
And what sort of role did you play in that, Larry?
I was a deadbeat dad.
Ah, okay.
Yep.
My son was a star, and I was a deadbeat dad. So, and I knew how to play that well. But
Well, let me jump over. We've got some questions from viewers here, participants in the Zoom. Let's see. One question from Joe Compton is, any particular opponents, college or pro, that you admired or perhaps were good defenders, etc.? Also, thanks for the memories. Love those teams of the 60s, he says.
I'm sorry, was that, I didn't understand the question.
Yeah, he was asking about just any particular opponents that you thought were especially memorable, good defenders, just people who really stood out as people you played against.
Well, actually, the most talented player I think I played against, and I played against a lot of talented people, but the most difficult opponent was a guy named Wesley Unseld. I played with him in the university student games, and he was a rookie of the year and the most valuable player in the NBA. And he played against Wilt Chamberlain, Bob Lanier, Kareem, and all those guys. And he could guard me. He was that quick, and very talented individual, very, very strong individual. So my kudos to him. I played against a lot of great players.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. Yeah. Well, I mentioned the, I guess Wilt Chamberlain was a player coach that you worked with briefly, but it sounded like his heart was not really in the coaching part of things.
No, he had his valet, actually his personal valet coached the practices, and he just came to the games, and they paid him $1 million a season to do that. That's what I'm saying. There was a lot of funny stories.
Yeah, yeah. Now, did you ever think about making the jump to the NBA?
No. I was tired of it after that. After you play that kind of games for so many years, my heart wasn't in it anymore.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Got another, this is jumping way ahead. We got another question here from Brian Lampkin from Scuppernong Books. Brian says, what motivated you to conduct a funeral for yourself back in the early 2000s? What was it like to lie in a coffin you built for yourself? So we're gonna need a little explanation on that one.
Well, no, it wasn't too difficult. We were at McCarty's, my buddy Sam McCarty's place, and out of nowhere somebody said, well, I think I said it. I said, when I pass away, I wonder if anybody will come to my funeral, And Sam, John McCarty's his real name, but he said, well, why don't you have it? Why don't you have your funeral? And I looked around, and the other guy sitting next to me at the bar says, yeah, why don't you have it? And it got legs. And the guy, one of my best friends, had a casket company, and he showed me how to build a coffin. We built it in my basement. Then we had the funeral, which is the pictures in the book, and then we had the what do you call it? The after party, the wake, or whatever you want to call it, was at a club right across the street from the cemetery, and we took the coffin there, and I had a stunt double sit in there for the first half an hour. Then we gave him a break, and then people started jumping in there and taking their pictures in there. So it was just a moment to reflect, because supposedly I won't be at mine, so we had.
So you were like Tom Sawyer. You got to attend your own funeral.
There you go. That's it. Yeah. And now I made a planter box out of the coffin.
Well, another thing I wanted to ask you, the gardening is another thing that Brian's asking about. And also wanted to ask something Stephen mentioned is that you're a voracious reader these days. I believe you said you read as many as 2 or 3 books a day sometimes. What do you like to read?
No, that was, I haven't done that lately, but
okay.
I had done that. Anything. I would read anything. I would get through a book and then just open up another one.
Yeah,
whatever I get my hands on.
Okay, fiction, nonfiction, just kind of
Yeah,
whatever,
exactly.
whatever caught your eye. So.
And now what I'm doing is I'm paging through the all the book lists, see what's selling.
Well, good luck with this one. Well, let's see. Brian had a question about your gardening. He said, did you know that Coach Krzyzewski at Duke is also a passionate gardener?
Didn't know that. No,
Yeah.
didn't know that.
But he's just curious about. I was wondering if you talk a little bit about how you ended up back in Catasauqua and your backyard garden there. It sounds like you got quite a garden.
Well, yeah, the place I'm at, yes, I do. I have a nice yard, and I enjoy being out in the yard, especially with the COVID virus around, and you don't have many places to go. I spend my time out there with the plants, just enjoying the outdoors. And the reason I came back to Catasauqua was my mother was she was having an operation back here, and then I went to join her for that, and then afterward. I felt comfortable being with her, and she was on the last couple of years of her life, and so I just stayed with her during that time period. And then I couldn't have gone anywhere, but I felt as comfortable. You can't, if you're not happy where you're at, you can't be happy anywhere. And I felt as if I could be as happy as I could be right here.
Yeah.
And it's turned out that way.
One interesting detail about your life there is Stephen said you walk everywhere these days, and you're a man who had a lot of amazing cars.
Yeah,
yeah.
I do walk. I do that kid. I go shopping. I take a backpack. So instead of getting up in the morning and taking a 3 mile walk, I take a 3 mile grocery shopping tour, and so I walk everywhere to where I'm going to go, because what better way to get your exercise in and get there, and not affect the environment.
Of course, yeah. Well, tell us a little about some of those cars. I believe you had a '55 Chevy early on, and you had a Jaguar at some point. Tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, well, I had a '55 Chevy, 56 Chevy, and a '57 Ford, and a '54 Studebaker in high school, and in college. You weren't allowed to drive as a freshman, so I used to borrow somebody's car there. But then I got a 57 Buick, a GS 400 Buick. And then after I wrecked that one, I got a 68 Chevrolet Corvette. That was the one I took out to California. And then I got a Jaguar after that.
Okay. So you've come full circle with not driving at all these days.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I've got maybe one more question here. Let's see. My friend Angie, who's on here with Russ. Angie supplies me with Carolina tickets these days. She and Russ have season tickets, and I always get to see a couple of games every year, thanks to them. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, she says she's surprised to see how few UNC players' biographies and autobiographies there are, and she hopes that you've started something with this one.
Well, I hope so too. I'm surprised, but you can tell everybody that reads this book what a great writer Stephen is. And if he could write theirs, God bless him.
And I need to correct something. I mentioned the questions earlier about your funeral and the gardening. Those were from Will Blythe, who wrote was it To Hate Like This Is to Be Happy Forever, I think is the name, book about the Carolina Duke rivalry. So unfairly credited Brian with those questions. Those are from Will Blythe. Stephen, I'm starting to run out of questions. We're about an hour into it. Anything else you'd like to mention or ask Larry about while we're all together here?
Just how much I appreciated Larry making all of his contacts and souvenirs available. I mean, he's got pictures of himself and Dickie Grubar shirtless in a room with Ursula Andress posters behind them, and pictures of the guys on Avery Beach suntanning, and the picture in the coffin. I mean, it's kind of a hoot to have all of that stuff that's not on the web
and the original retirement jersey from the Smith Center that had to be downsized.
That's right.
Yeah, there's some great photos in the book. That's another thing I don't think we've really talked about up to this point.
Yeah, it made my job easier. I just got to cherry pick what interested me the most. That was kind of a pleasure.
Yeah. All right. Well, unless there's any other questions, anything else anybody'd like to add, I think we'll wrap it up now. Larry, I really appreciate this. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Same here. Thank you guys for coming on board.
And thanks again to Brian and Steve with Scuppernong. It's always a pleasure to work with you folks, and it's such a blessing to have a store like that here in Greensboro. We really appreciate it. Thanks again. Thank you, Stephen. Thanks everybody for participating tonight.